So he gave me a month to make the changes that he wanted for the manuscript. And then my grandma died.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Beyond the Manuscript. I am your host, Cooper Anderson, and joining me today is an author and poet extraordinaire. She is an MLit graduate and current DFA candidate of the University of Glasgow in Scotland. Her debut novel, You Know Her, was published by MCD FSG. It was named Crime Read's Best Crime Debut Novel of the Month and Tortulia's Best Crime Thriller of the Year so far. So please, help me in welcoming today's guest, Meagan Jennett. How are we doing today, Meagan?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on. And
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's just, it's always fun to have a fellow alumnus from the prestigious University of Glasgow, and just to have another fellow person who's, seen their grimy walls and stuff and thought, this is where a good place to get an education for
yeah.
me. So I wanted to kick off today's interview with, can you tell us a little bit today about your book, You Know Her, and how you came up with the idea?
Yeah. So the book at its heart, it's really a story of two women who live in a small town in Virginia, kind of loosely based on the small town I grew up in. And they both work in male-dominated industries, one as a bartender, and one she's a cop, and she really wants to be a detective, so she's trying to move up, or I guess technically it's not up. I was corrected by this a lot. It's a slide over in rank, but regardless, they become friends, and it's not really a spoiler because we know right from the beginning the bartender is killing men. So they sort of circle around each other for the book, and I won't tell you how it ends because.
Nice, good. And so where did this idea come from? How did this originate?
So a couple things kind of converged to make this happen. One, I happened to be reading, I guess this was about probably spring or summer of 2016, and I was reading Stephen King's On Writing, and I was living in New York City, and I really wanted to write a book. At the time, I had been working as a poet, to use the term working loosely, I had been writing poetry for a long time, but I wanted to write a novel, and I just didn't know where to start. And he had this little exercise at the back of his book of it was like a story prompt where a husband is sitting on the couch alone at night, and his wife comes up behind him and wraps his arms around her, and you were supposed to turn that into some kind of horror story. And this was right before Trump got elected, so I started writing about that this woman had escaped from jail and all the women had been put. I don't know. That story never actually went anywhere, but I had that seed of women being criminals. In my mind. And then I was talking to a friend in New York who's a brilliant poet and horror writer in his own right, and he loves really, really brutal horror films, and he is the most not the type of person that you would expect to like that kind of stuff. So we were talking, I just asked him one day, why do you love these so much? And he just told me a story that immediately Sophie was in my ear, and she wouldn't shut up. So that's sort of where it came from initially, and it just kind of erupted out of me after that. So
nice, good. Yeah, I think one thing that a lot of people who either are just starting to writing or if they're just curious about it, they tend to think, oh, a fully formed book idea just lands in their lap, and then the person, just takes a couple of months to go write it, and then, they wait for the limousine to pull up with its wheelbarrows of money for people to show up, and then that's not quite. It usually starts much smaller, and then the skill comes with adding to that little spark of inspiration on top of it. So you mentioned earlier before that you are from Virginia, and like me, you grew up in the American South. I grew up in North Carolina. And so I was wondering for you, are we rivals now? Is that what this is? So I was asking is what kind of influence do you think that kind of upbringing has on your writing? Because it definitely has it on me for sure.
Oh, yeah, I think definitely, part of it is I mean, Charlottesville is definitely a little bit more kind of progressive and has a foot in the sort of modern educated world because of UVA, but you're still steeped in all the Bible Belt does kind of start in Virginia,
Hmm.
and, so you've got all of that. I went to an evangelical school for a while, and if people ask you why you get into writing horror, it's from, like, reading some of the Old Testament books or
Hmm. Yeah, I my first like 3 years of education, so like kindergarten, first and second grade, was at a Catholic school,
Mhm.
and I
Oh, yeah.
remember there was like a good hour almost every day of like, all right, we're gonna read about Noah this time, and then when you're at that age, they really gloss over. So everyone died, and
Yeah,
then we started over as as the human race. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense when you're five
yeah,
and that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of that going on for sure
yeah,
in the Bible Belt.
yeah, no, definitely a lot of, like, yeah, difficult stories, that are but also fascinating because there's so much, like, magic in the Bible, but also I mean, my grandmother was sort of the Irish Catholic tradition, but because of being descended from Irish folks, she was also knew about all those fairies and the banshees and all of that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
So was kind of getting that from all sides. And then I'm sure just walking around the kind of Appalachian mountain region is just your imagination can run wild in the woods out there. So I think all of that coming together, and I've always really loved the kind of Southern Gothic tradition, writing tradition. And
mhm.
so I guess I just tried to pull all of that together in my work.
Sure, sure.
Um,
Excellent. So this you are actually the first guest we've had on the show who is traditionally published. Like you found a literary agent, a publisher, you had what was that experience like from okay, you have this manuscript and then what happens between that and seeing your book on a shelf?
yeah. Well, one, I will say I got, like, stupid lucky, so I feel like I have
That
to
is
put
a
that
big part of it. I would do it, yeah, that
Yeah,
for especially for
yeah,
traditional publishing for brand new authors.
yeah,
Because it's so I do want to point out just for people listening at home, we're now currently living in a time where the most amount of people are making a living from writing. However, launching a brand new writer is also at its most difficult. So once you're able to push past apparently this debut, it gets easier, but it's also that first hurdle has gotten a lot taller, essentially.
yeah, 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 so it took me about 5 years to actually write the book. I say it erupted out of me, and it did when I had the time to sit and write, and that character never shut up, but it did take me. I was working
Mm,
3 jobs for most of the time that I was writing this book. I was ghost writing for other people, so a lot of my
mm,
creative energy went to that. I did the MLit, so the
mhm.
first 30 pages, I think, of this book were my MLit final dissertation, but that's,
Nice.
also in large part, like, the COVID was horrible, but everything shutting down actually gave me the time to, like, sit and work, without having to do anything else. So, yeah, it took me about 5 years, and then I was in Scotland in the first half of 2020, and I had now this very kind of second draft that was starting to actually look like the book that I wanted it to be. So I took it home with me. I went back to the States for a year, and in that year, I didn't have a car because I had sold mine before moving to Scotland. I knew I wanted to
Mhm.
go back to Scotland, so I wasn't gonna try to spend all that
Yeah.
money on a car, so I just stayed home, and I was lucky that my mom was able to let me stay in her house and just work on this book, and I had enough to get me through that year. So that's what I did. I just worked on the book every day, and I guess by January, I knew I was almost done, and I had this tattoo that I've wanted to get for years with, like, symbols from the book, and I told myself, "Okay, you can't get that tattoo until you start querying agents. So
Mm.
I booked an appointment for a month later, and I forced myself to finish the book.
I've
Uh,
I've definitely done that myself
uh,
with certain tattoos where I'm like, this is gonna be my reward for
yeah,
finishing this
exactly.
story, manuscript, whatever it is. Yeah, so I totally get that for sure. That's actually a cool project. I don't want to talk about it too much just yet because it's still in the very like how did you put it? It's the piece of metal I just taken out of the forge. It's still kind of
Uh,
red hot, and I need to let it settle
yeah.
and stuff. So yeah,
Oh yeah, that's important. That's I've been trying to like hammer that lesson home to my students that they need to like write it and then put it away for a little while. Don't look at
yeah.
it.
I mean, just because you're mentioning on writing
Mhm.
earlier, Stephen King even says that he's like, I write a book and then I put it in a drawer for 3 months, and I
Yeah.
write another book,
Yeah.
and then I come back, and then sorry, and then I come back to it 3 months later. And I'm like, oh yeah, let me revisit it and clean this thing up a bit.
Yeah, no, it's so important to do that.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah. So back to it. You were querying agents,
yeah,
and I'm assuming you found one.
I did. Yeah. So I got like again, I said I got really lucky. So I started querying agents literally the morning of the day I got this tattoo. And the first round I was using what's that website? Query Shark.
Yeah.
Query Shark? I was using Query Shark, which is great. And it was worth I think it's like $25 to access everything.
Mhm.
And the first round of agents, I heard nothing back from. I think maybe one of them eventually got back to me with just like a generic no thanks, but I've not heard back from a single other one of them, and it's been years now. So I guess I waited about a month, and then I figured I might as well just send to my next batch. So I sent to my next batch, and a week later, I heard from Mark Falcon, who is my current agent, saying, he loved the sample I sent. Can I send the whole book? So I sent the whole book, and a week later, I heard from him again that just said, I would like to offer you representation. So, and he's the only one really I think that I've ever heard from that even wanted to read the rest of the book. So I
You only need the one though. You
yeah,
don't you don't need 50 people fighting over you. You just need one good agent in your corner.
yeah, no, it was good. So I did ask him if I could have 2 weeks to think about it, and yes, he said, "Of course you can." So I contacted a few of his other authors, and I got in touch with one who had signed with him maybe a year prior and still hadn't, they hadn't sold this person's book yet, and they still really liked Mark and vouched for him, which was a good sign to me that, even though they hadn't been successful, they still really respected him and liked him.
Mhm.
So and I took the contract that he had sent me to an older like the good thing about being a bartender for so many years is that you get a lot of these like old men who know how to read legal contracts as your regulars.
Uh-huh.
So I took it to him and had him look it over and we talked through it. So then I don't know, it just felt right. So I went back to Mark and
I
we
don't mean to
talked.
interrupt. My cat is
Oh,
interrupting
your
our
cat.
stream. What are you going? What are you
Didn't even
doing?
see it. It blends in with the
She's
bookshelf.
yeah. Well, again, we're still decorated for fall at the moment. We haven't gotten the Christmas
Oh yeah.
decorations up, but because she's an all black cat, she just blends right in. You can see just a
Oh,
pair
that's
of eyes over. Get out of there! What are you doing? Get out of there! Come on, go
what's her
late,
name?
go late. Her name is Storm.
Oh, she's cute.
Yeah.
Storm.
The reason we call her Storm is because on the first day we got her, she destroyed everything in our
Oh,
entire apartment.
no.
She just not. I just say destroyed. She just knocked everything over. Because either she was just nervous or whatever. She knocked everything over on our shelves. And I'm like,
Oh,
okay, you're just a thunderstorm just running
yeah,
through the place. So you have representation.
yeah, yeah.
You then what happens next?
So Mark gave me so he's very smart. So I signed with him in the beginning of April, and he said to me, "We need to get this book on sub by early summer, like May, June time, because all the editors will start to go on summer vacation around August,
Mm,
and then
mm,
they've got all their like fall book fests and galas, and then the holidays come and you just miss them. So if we want to sell it, we need to do it now." So he gave me a month to make the changes that he wanted for the manuscript, which wasn't too much, but there were some things he wanted fleshed out and kind of tweaked. And then my grandma died.
Oh
so,
no.
um, so we like maybe a day or two before the book, he put it on sub. My grandma died, and then he also had a death in his family,
Mm,
um, a couple weeks later. So it was like a weird bonding experience to have
mhm,
with your agent. And then, so that was May. 2 weeks later, I got a phone call, or well, he got me in touch with an editor at a publisher who wanted the book, who wanted to talk to me. So her and I had a meeting on Zoom, talked about the book, and then I went the next week, I think, up to Massachusetts to bury my grandmother.
mm, mm,
um, and while I was up there, another editor, the Daphne, who I ended up working with at MCD, also made an offer on the book. So Mark, I will say that what was really great about him as an agent, not only as his sort of business acumen, but how good he was. He knew I was at a funeral, and so he was really good about telling the editors, "She cannot talk this day, like, she can
mhm.
talk
Yeah.
next day," but he really guarded that space for me,
Oh, that's nice.
which was nice 'cause I feel like there's a lot of pressure to make things happen quickly in publishing,
Mhm,
just really set those boundaries, which was good. So the next day I was talking to Daphne on my cell phone, like, walking around a parking lot in some place just outside of Boston. It was a it was a weird experience, but
sure, I bet.
yeah, but, yeah, so we ended up with MCD,
Was
just
there
it's
anything specific why you wanted to work with him? Like, did Daphne, the editor, she just like, oh, she just gets it. Like, she gets the entire idea, and I want to work with her more than the other editor that you talked to?
yeah, yeah, so they were both, I mean, they were both incredible publishing houses. It was I just it yeah, like I said, none of this was, like, normal. I did not expect this to happen. They're both houses that are kind of under the larger Macmillan umbrella,
Mhm, mhm,
and the both editors were lovely. I really enjoyed talking to them both and kind of hearing what they thought about the book. The other publishing house wanted it to push it in a much more commercial direction than I want to go as a writer, and Daphne and MCD definitely allow for a little bit more experimentation.
mm,
The ending of the book in particular, they Daphne liked and didn't want to change, and the other editor did, and that was something I really felt strongly about. So, and it also just came down to a few, yeah, if you've got an editor who's excited about the book as it is and a publishing house who wants it, mostly yeah, you go in and you edit it and you make changes, but they liked it, the idea of it as it was, and they weren't trying to push it in a direction that just doesn't fit with who I am as a writer.
mhm.
Um, I trusted them to then take it and market it and take care of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that, just for people listening at home, that's kind of the idea of a really good editor, is there isn't so much to make the thing that's the most marketable, or how would you, like, most generic in the current moment. It's the idea that they're going to bring out the best version of your book and then put it on the market. The
Yeah.
idea is, like, you're not really following big trends just to appease the masses. Essentially, it's much more like, okay, let's find the best version of this, and then people will just come to love it because it's so good,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, good. Awesome. So how long was it from you're working with the editor to it actually came out? Like, because I think a lot of times people don't realize is that, yes, a lot of times publishing deals have to happen very fast, but the actual production time takes months, just in
Yeah.
the sense that you have to, gather materials of paper and ink, cover artists. If you have an audio version, you have to work with a voice actor, like that kind of stuff. So how long was that process?
It was about a year and a half, I think, total. One thing they don't tell you is that you sell the book and then you don't get your actual contract for, like, 2 months. So and I was on a
It's
tight
all
time.
handshake deals, or like, yeah, we're
Yeah, yeah,
totally
and
gonna
I
buy
was,
this. Totally. Just
yeah,
keep waiting for that email.
yeah, and because I knew I was going back to the UK, I had to get all that paperwork in before setting foot on British soil because of the visa stuff and all of that. Like, you
Oh,
have to
right,
get
because you
things
would
done.
be technically you would
So
be earning money,
yeah,
right? And there's
yeah,
a or yeah, there's like a and you have to pay. Would you have to pay double taxes for that? Like, you pay UK taxes because you technically earned it in the UK, and
yeah.
then American.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah,
wow.
yeah, and there's just stuff with, like, student visas and that. So anyways, we
Mhm,
got it in, right under the wire, I think like 2 weeks before I actually left the States. So that was good. Um,
I was like, you're making deals in parking lots. You're in the airport, just
yeah.
like docu signing major contract as you're boarding onto a plane, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Oh gosh. I know. I feel like that my Italian genetics just like must shine through and all of these things. With parking lot deals. But yeah, so it was also a strange time because I was starting my PhD. So um so they my publisher and my supervisors, they've never actually spoken to each other, but they kind of talked to each other through me, and they were both thankfully very respectful of each other's time. So Daphne would say, okay, they send you, what they do is they send you a long letter, a couple pages with you know all of the things that they want you to change about the book and where it's
Yeah.
not working, which is a little bit jarring after you've just spent months being told how wonderful and brilliant you are, and then you
Hmm.
get this like letter. um but yeah, so she sent me that, and I think she gave me about a month, 6 weeks. They give you the contract I signed gave me 6 months to get all of my developmental edits in.
Right.
So I had, and the way that they do payment is this contract, at least they paid me a third of my advance upon signing, and then they dangle the rest of it in front of you,
Yeah.
make sure that you hit these
Uh-huh.
deadlines that they have. So
Yeah, so it's
so
like essentially a signing bonus, and then was it the next 6 months after the editing, and then the last third was when it came out, right? Then when it
yeah,
debuts?
yeah,
Yeah.
yep. Um, so yeah, so I had 6 months to do that, and it was a strange time because I was starting a PhD, so I was trying to also do writing for that, which is its own book, and then do these edits, and then I got like really sick, and but somehow it all worked out, and we got it together. And the I guess I was about 2 weeks. I ended up being 2 weeks early on my developmental edits, and it was a point where there was one scene I couldn't get it right. I couldn't figure out how to word it, and Daphne and I had talked about it over Zoom, and she knew what I was trying to do, but she didn't know how to help me get it right. And I took it to my now ex-boyfriend, but at the time boyfriend, who's a poet, and I was like, "Please look at this. Please look at it. Tell me what it needs." And he read it over, and he went, "Oh, you just need to do this," and it was perfect. It was exactly what
Mm,
needed to happen. So definitely, if you have other writers in your life, I recommend
yeah.
using them as outside eyes. So I sent it in, and then so you do 6 months of developmental edits, and then it was about, I think, a month later they sent me back the version with copy edits, and you have to go through each note on the copy edits and
Mhm.
agree with them or explain why they're wrong. And they will fight you on those
Yeah.
things sometimes. So that took about 3 months to get through because you do several rounds of copy edits, and then you think you're done, and then you get to do the proofreading, and the
Yeah.
proofreading edits are extra nitpicky. And by that point, I think I was like, I don't care, just change it. If you think it needs to change, fine, go ahead.
Mhm.
Um, so that took me into the summer, and then it was finally, I guess by July, it was finally done with all the
Mhm.
edits by the end of July. And I got my advanced copies, proof copies. They went out in October, and it did take them about a month to get to the UK because apparently they got diverted to like Switzerland or something. I don't know. I got this weird package that was wrapped in like blue
Mhm.
tarp. Um, but yeah, and then you just hang out for a couple of months, and it came out in April.
Mm.
But you do start, all of the press starts up during that time. So I guess
Mm, mm.
yeah, like last
Can you tell us a bit about that process on like what? So, because I would imagine it would be a little jarring of like, okay, this is the first thing I've like the first novel I ever wrote. It's it's starting to pick up speed. What was that shift like of like, well, nobody knows who I am. Oh, now like it's like Crime Reads is now asking for an interview, and Tortulias is asking for quotes and stuff. What was that? What was that like? That big shift?
Yeah, it was weird, and it was something I talked to my supervisor about quite a bit because both of them are published authors, and I was very lucky that I was sort of cushioned in the cocoon of the creative writing department at Glasgow, so I could go to them and just say, I'm really nervous because I am a very private person in general, and so all of a sudden realizing that like Oh, people who I don't know are gonna know my name, and not only that, they're gonna have some of them will have very strong opinions about what I've written, and it might not always be, like, nice, was weird,
Mm,
and yeah, and doing interviews, it's just strange when you go from thinking that you're I guess, one, because a lot of this happened during COVID for me, and
mm.
also my family do not know anything about writing or the writing industry, so for them, they were like, "Yay," but they didn't, like, get it, so we never really had a big it never really felt real until the
But
book was
I have another question just because 'cause you're talking
Mhm.
about that, because
Yeah.
I think I'm probably in a similar boat where are you out of, like, your high school friend group, are you, like, the one that went off to college and is actually interested in artistic adventures and stuff like that? Yeah, because like, I have friends who are like I told them, like, "Oh, I sold my first, like, short story." And they were like, "Oh, that's sick, man. How much you get for it?" And I'm
Yeah.
like, I got like a couple $100 and it was pretty, I
Yeah.
was like, oh, sweet. So drinks are on you. And I'm like, this is not the celebration I was looking for. And so, yeah, if you're, yeah, if, if you come from a small hometown and you're the only artsy one, you can't really expect other people to quite get it. You know,
No.
they're happy for you, but they're
Yeah.
just a little more of like, this is a new world. Yeah, I have no
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, no, it definitely was a little bit of that. So I think for me it was I hadn't quite sunk in yet, and because I was working still all the time, like, I didn't get to, like, just sit with it,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and I'm also just I'm not a particularly emotive person too, so maybe I just hold on to everything, like, in my deep inside, but, yeah, all of a sudden, all these people wanna talk to you, and they want your opinions, and they want you your interviews are going up on the internet and all this stuff, and it was just strange, I mean, it was cool, though, it was fun, it's, like, very, um I don't know, like, I have above my kitchen table, I got this letter, so the book is being translated into French and German, and the editor from France who bought it wrote me a page and a half of just, like, the most wonderful things about
Oh, that's
my
nice.
writing and my book and, like, what he wants to do with it in France and all the and it's so lovely. I'm gonna meet him in April, but I printed out the letter and I hung it above my kitchen table, so if I'm having a bad day, because I'm still a human who's messy and I have bad days, so I look at that letter and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, there's somebody in France who loves me." Um,
It's always a good boost, right? They're like somebody out there recognizes the 26 letters and a handful of punctuation that I turned into art, and somebody
yeah,
else likes it out there. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, so
cool.
that was nice. And we did have when I went back home, because we launched it at a bookstore in Crozet, which is where I came from, my hometown, and, Crozet did not have a bookstore when I was growing up, so,
Mm.
so there's this really wonderful store now called Bluebird& and Co., and they have been so excited about the book, in ways that I didn't expect, in ways that because also, you probably know this too, if you grow up in a small town and you are the artsy kid, you never quite feel like you fit in, and I definitely
Mm,
never fit in with the Charlottesville artsy crowd, which is much more waspy, and the
mhm.
Charlottesville, um I've just not for whatever reason, have never broken through that wall, but Crozet fully, like, embraced me, and
Oh,
Bluebird
that's
was so
nice.
excited. They had, a big launch, 75 people came, and most of them were just, like my track coach came, and, my best friend came, and all these people who probably never go to literary events ever in their life showed up, and they had all bought the book, and then you realize too, you get so nervous. I went to sign people's books and I forgot their names. I've known them for 30 years and I just forgot. I was like, "Oh my
Yeah.
god, I'm so sorry." But,
See, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Good. And so next question is, what are you working on now? I know you're wrapping up your DFA at the moment. And is that what you're working on now? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I'm sort of working on 2 separate projects at once, and, every time I tell that to anyone in the department at Glasgow, they go, Are you sure that's a good idea?" Like, but yeah, so in a nutshell, they're both kind of looking at is, so near where I grew up, and just just west of Crozet, there used to be a community called Sugar Hollow, Virginia, in the Blue
Mhm,
Ridge Mountains, and in the 1930s, the state of Virginia used eminent domain to clear all the families that were living in the Shenandoah Mountains out, so they could build this national park. And it's a really complicated history because on one hand, we're all thankful that the park exists and is public land. But it was also an incredibly painful history of I think it was about
Displacing
1,300
people. Yeah.
families. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And so I grew up as a child kind of playing around those ruins of houses and chimneys and not knowing what they were, just like, well, it's here, it's cool, whatever.
Yeah.
And I hadn't known about that until maybe about 10 years ago. I met a woman whose family had been one of those displaced families, and she started telling me about it. And there's this really great grassroots movement to get the state to acknowledge that history. So I started researching them, and I've discovered that most of the people within the parkland were kind of ethnically German, except for this group in Sugar Hollow and just over the mountain in Augusta County. They were what we would call Scotch Irish
Mhm.
in the States, and they over here call them Ulster Scots. And if you want to go down a rabbit hole, there's a really long, problematic, painful history of the Ulster Scots as well. But
Mm.
regardless, like they are the ones who settled most of the southern Appalachian region.
Yeah.
So I've
Real
been
quick to piggyback off of that, what most people don't really realize is if you don't grow up in the Appalachian Mountain area, um, that's actually where a lot of the like Jack stories originated from
Mhm.
or transformed from Scottish like fairy tales. Like this is like Jack and the Beanstalk,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the other ones are there. Their most popular version comes from the retelling of them from the different families in that region.
Well, on that vein, I think my favorite, because I've been kind of tracking them back to where they came from, which would have originally been the southwestern coast of Scotland. So sorry, everyone who wants to think that you're related to Highlanders. You're probably not. If you're a Scotch Irish, you're a
You're from
lowland,
Kilmarnock, and
lowland
that's
Scot.
it. Like,
Yeah. But they have this story of a guy named Sonny Bean. I don't know if you
oh
are
yeah,
familiar with him.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Sonny
So,
B.
yeah, he lived in a cave off the coast of Ayrshire, and with his wife and their inbred children, and they would capture the civilized English travelers that were, on the road, and they would take them back to the cave and eat them. And I
Yeah,
just find it so fascinating that you can track that story down into like all of these movies that are coming out about cannibal rednecks. It's like,
yeah,
wow,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's where it came from.
it's just the
Um,
Scottish version of like the hills have eyes, essentially.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, wrong turn. But so that and the so yeah, so I've kind of two projects going on. One, the next book I'm writing is specifically about the last year-ish of time when people are kind of watching what's happening and the state coming in. And I think I'm trying to lean a little bit more into horror. Sort of been reading a lot of like Picnic at Hanging Rock has been a huge influence on me, and Stephen Graham Jones's writing, The
Mm,
Only Good Indians, things like that. Um, and then the DFA is really more, it's a totally different style of writing. I've rolled together, we have to do a kind of critical academic piece and then your creative piece, and I've squished them together into sort of autoethnography of growing up in that area, moving back here, and the history, shared ethnic history, but also geologic history and the language history. Don't know if you know this, but you probably grew up, if you're from that area, speaking some dialect of Scots, which I'm calling
yeah.
Appalachian Scots. And linguists roll their eyes when I say that, but it's true. Um, so yeah, the kind of two things that are separate, but they work together, and as far as the research goes for them. So
Very cool. Very cool.
yeah.
Okay, we're running a little bit out of time here. So my last question for today is: what advice would you give someone who's just starting out writing?
I would say, well, two things. One is just read. Like you have to read. I'm
Mhm.
always shocked at the number of people that want to write that don't, and read a lot, read widely. Don't just read your
Yeah.
genre. But I would also say just, you really have to believe in yourself. I had so many people tell me that you're too young, or, most people never finish it. Or I had one of my regulars did say to me, "I don't think you'll ever finish the book." And I think he did it on purpose because he knew I'm really stubborn. And I was like, screw
Mm,
you. Now I'm going to finish it. But yeah, you really have to believe in yourself and just do it. I don't know. It's hard to really give more
sure.
better
Yeah.
advice than that. But yeah.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah. Develop that thick skin where I don't think a lot of people realize anyway, is rejection is a big part of this
Oh
business.
yeah,
You
yes,
know, you're going to get rejected by professors, agents, publishers, editors,
yeah.
and you got to learn to just not take that personally, even though writing is such a personal thing.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, even now that the book is out, every once in a while I get like tipsy and I let myself read my Goodreads reviews, which I know you're never
No,
supposed to do.
no, what are you doing?
But
Why?
some people just hate it. They hate my writing, which is, fine, but it does make you
Yeah.
somebody had written something along the lines of, well, the first book is usually an author's best book. And so I'd be curious to see her sophomore effort. And if it's not better than this, I don't think that she has any business writing. And
Oh.
I was like, maybe I shouldn't write anymore. Like it really just had this dark night of the soul moment.
Can't do that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is something to like to that I tell other people that even classical books like Lord of the Rings,
Mhm.
I'm just blanking a bunch, like the really famous books that people love, they have 1-star reviews on Goodreads too.
Yeah.
And so if you ever want to feel better about yourself, or like, oh, some people are just plain wrong, go
Yeah.
read those like 1-star reviews of your favorite book, and they're like, oh,
Mhm.
they don't know better. I don't suggest doing that very masochistic
Yeah.
exercise
I
of
haven't done it in months. It's like, yeah.
yeah, good. All right. Well, Megan, where can people find your stuff?
Um, well, I have a website, but I don't update it very often. Um, I would suggest I'm most active on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Meg Jennett. Um, and yeah, that's probably my favorite social media. I do have a Twitter as well that I use. It's Lego my Mego, but yeah, it's for the 90s kids out there in America. But yeah, definitely Instagram is where I'm most active. And I do like kind of interacting with people. Sometimes every once in a while someone will send me a message or things like that. And it's always nice to hear from people. So
Very cool. All right. Well, that is going to do it for us today and another episode of Beyond the Manuscript. I've been your host, Cooper Anderson. I want to thank one more time Meagan Jennett for coming on the show today. Remember, this podcast is powered by Manuscripts. Manuscripts never write alone. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.
thank you.